Welcome to Fifth Dimensional Leadership. Today I have a really fascinating entrepreneur. His name is Joe Mullings. He's been building companies and careers since 1989. You're dating yourself and me, Joe.
Hmm.
He founded and is chairman and CEO of the Mullings Group, the world's leading search firm in the medical device industry. The Mullings Group is responsible for more than 7,000 successful searches, with more than 600 companies in the medical device industry. His clients are multi-billion-dollar companies like J&J, Google, Medtronic, Abbott, Siemens, as well as emerging startup companies that are bringing the futuristic technologies like surgical robotics, telerobotics, AI, deep learning to the market. Joe was recently appointed Chief Visionary Officer, I really like that, of MRI Networks, the third largest executive recruiting firm with 400 offices worldwide. He's also, one more, if not two, president and CEO of DragonFly Stories, which is the production company behind the award-winning docu-series True Future, of which he is the host and producer, hence this beautiful backdrop he has. He's also a founder of the media platform TMG 360, a medtech news and opinion website. He has an engineering degree from the University of Dayton, Ohio. That seems like nothing compared to everything else I just read. Welcome, Joe Mullings.
Thank,
Delighted to have you today.
thank you so much, and it's great to be here. And thanks for just such a beautiful intro. It was probably the best read and shared I've ever had. So thanks for that.
Pleasure. Easy to talk about somebody who's so accomplished.
Thank you.
I want to get into it because I feel like there's so many different elements to you, and I have a sense that how they all might have emerged, right? But I would, before we start, I would love to kind of hear your story as to how you came to build this organization.
Oh gosh, the organization itself, it's really taken on a life of its own. It started in 1989 as a search firm with a two-desk search firm in the health tech, med tech industry. And then from there, over the years, we're the largest search firm by many orders of magnitude around the world in our specialty. We have, as you mentioned, a production studio, a marketing machine. The search firm itself, of course, is the heart of everything. And we continue to evolve based upon what the world is doing. You know, most of the people in search and talent access are still working from a playbook of the 1950s and 60s, and how we share information and how we digest information and how we learn about the industry. We've been telling stories at scale now for 6 or 7 years to our audience, which are the individuals who are looking for career insight and advice. We've taken it to a full-blown media play. And what that does is basically allows us to share our subject matter expertise to the hundreds of thousands per day versus a few hundred, which is what the telephone does.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I love that you mentioned that it's back to the 1950s because having worked in one of the big search firms myself, that was the origin of these Mr. Spencer Stewart, Mr. Heydrich, Mr. Struggles. They were all back in the 50s. They were in management consulting organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
it
right.
sounds like you're a bit of a disruptor. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, you know what I even like to use? I had coined this word a couple of years ago, so I try and be deliberate with my speech, is I think we're more of a dislocator, because a disruptor is like a speed bump. You can always speed up and catch a disruptor, but once you choose to incorporate a business practice that dislocates yourself from any sort of comparator amongst your peers or competitors, it then requires an entire change of methodology and change of work and even platforms you communicate on. So we chose to dislocate our business model rather than disrupt, because you can't put your foot on the gas if I dislocate myself, because you run off a cliff if you're using the same business practices.
Love that. That explains a lot. Makes perfect sense to me too.
Mhm.
I really, really like that. And I too am someone who is quite deliberate with my words. So I appreciate that in you. Tell me just a little bit more about how it is that you and your firm have been so successful for so long. 30 years That's a long time, given the cycles that we've been through and given all of the change. And the follow-on, a related question to that is, you use this language, again, deliberate, talent access. Talk about both of those things for me.
Sure. So, well, let's start with terminology. Talent access is, I think our intention is to build companies and build careers. We are headhunters, so I never hide from that. What I don't like is the idea of talent acquisition. It infers a one-way street. And I think the industry was changing before February of 2020. But come February of 2020, as people thought about things, the individual is now in charge. Since the history of work, if you will, the company always held the upper hand. And so for the first time ever, the individual is in charge. So now we think about, how do we give talent access to the market, rather than the old school of, we're going to teach you, Mr. Company, how to acquire somebody from a I'm going to buy you. No. Now what we're going to do is we're going to teach organizations how to best represent themselves, so the talent can get access to them and make a decision. Who will I become when I come to work at your company? So that was very intentional, talent access. As far as building the company in 30 years of remaining on top, I think first is the team. I believe I can take this team and I can come up with the best dry cleaning business in the world if you gave us 90 days. I think I could take this team, and as long as I'm not competing with Mr. Elon Musk, I think we can take on any project there is and be a top performer or a top competitor within a very short window of time. So we're very deliberate on who comes into our team, and we make sure that our goals and North Star, if you will, align with what their interest is and who they want to become, so they realize that through our machine. And in our interview process, which is very, very deep, more than 9 different in-person steps or points of engagement, is the first 2 or 3, we make sure that we think you have what it takes to be one of us. And then the rest of the time, we make sure you know who we are. So when you step on the field, maybe you want to play for the NFL Super Bowl champs, but are you willing to do NFL Super Bowl champ things every day? And if it's not, we want to find that out early.
Yeah.
And then the market. We very deliberately chose medical device, and this is an analogous sort of conversation for any business if you're in search. Is I first said, okay, we're getting older. We're not only getting older as a populace, we want to live better as we live longer. Technology will always seek a higher ground, especially when it comes to our own survival. There was a built-in governor called the FDA, not allowing that market to grow too fast, because when a market grows too fast, it craters and gets crushed. And no matter how good of a headhunting firm you're in, if there is an opportunity there, there's nobody to headhunt. And then, though medtech is about a 7% growth annually, there are micro markets within it that grow 20 to 30%. And those are supported by venture capital, private equity, public money, M&A. And so that dry powder, when they put it into those high growth markets, they want the best people for their first to market or market dominance. They're willing to be smart enough to partner up and bring those people on via search, and therefore they get to market quicker than anybody else. And you're talking about billion-dollar market grabs. So all of that went into our analysis back in 1989, and it's proved out really well. We led the world in stents. We led the world in drug-eluting stents. We led the world in surgical robotics. We led the world in telehealth. We led it in structural heart. All of these markets have been multi-billion-dollar markets of growth in the health tech industry. So those are the 2 things I think that we have really focused on that have allowed us to be super successful and then reinvest that success back into what talent access should look like moving forward.
I love that, and I get it. My question is, do your clients always get what the way that you want to approach this, because that translates into how you're assessing the talent, right?
Yeah.
How does that work? Because they can have some very rigid, old school, completely irrelevant criteria, right?
They do. And you know, so let's start with I think the victim of current executive thinking would be the HR function. The HR function is not at fault. The HR function is the victim of the behavior of the decision making of leadership. Leadership, sometime in the 1950s, said, HR, you're going to be in charge of hiring. Now, first of all, those are two different skill sets. HR is a maternalistic, we will take care of the people inside of our four walls, we'll make sure we're compliant with how we're working with them, benefits, compensation plans, etc. Talent access, especially in the last 20 years, has gone from putting want ads in the paper and sorting through resumes to an invasive, aggressive, and I mean aggressive in an elegant way, messaging out to the marketplace to build a hiring brand, and then bringing that in, and then making sure that the customer service in your hiring process is second to none. And so executives still have not, well, not all of them, but a majority still have not figured that out, that their HR group is underskilled, overworked, undertrained in the world of work as it's emerging today. And I've been saying for years now that every single C-suite should have a reasonable part of their bonus based upon their hiring brand in the marketplace, because we will behave on which our rewards are determined. And you would be really well served in the C-suite if part of your bonus was based upon what is your hiring brand and hiring experience in the marketplace. So back to your comment, they are not ready for what we were doing. When we put video out, we were the very first search firm with video on LinkedIn. People thought we lost our mind. People thought that I wanted to be an actor. People thought I was getting out of search. People thought I was a media attention whore, but I was not. I was starting to create an environment where we teach, build, and inspire, because that's what the LinkedIn platform is. It's not a hiring platform, about how you should develop your own personal career, your own personal brand, and how organizations should be telling their story, not their brand, not their product story, but who you'll become once you come to our company. They're still getting there, but it's picking up inertia.
Yeah. You have said that most people don't know how to evaluate talent, and I couldn't agree more, by the way. And I think I've heard you use the term competency. But why don't you tell me, since you have very deliberate language as well, how do you assess talent, and how do you get your clients to assess on that same basis? Because you could show them some just killer talent, and if they're still looking at the whatever the resume says, right, they might miss it. How do you reconcile those two?
So let's start internally how we assess talent. And I think it's probably a reasonably good baseline for how all organization. Typically today, we tend to hire people with the best resumes and those who perform best in the interview. That's pretty much. And you want to talk about shotgun marriages. People are making $1 million decisions on 2 face-to-face interviews, or maybe a Zoom interview if we even bring back the last few years with the unfortunate pandemic. But it's really the person who performs best on the interview and has the resume that seems to click with what the standards are. When we evaluate talent here, we look at a couple things. There's 2 things important. The first thing is intelligence and conscientiousness. Those are the 2 main drivers for me, because when you're intelligent, you can come to a number of potential solutions to challenges, and maybe more importantly, you learn to ask the better question when a challenge arises, because too many times people reflexively look to fix a problem without really asking, is that the problem we're trying to fix? And so there's a direct relationship to that, and you can test for intelligence, right? IQ test for intelligence. And conscientiousness, you've got your big Ocean 5. You've got your, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and extroversion. And so Conscientiousness is, can you do things on time? Will you do what you say you're going to do? Are you really well sort of organized, et cetera? And so those are important. And then we follow that up with integrity, which is the granddaddy of them all. And then we finally have to have curiosity in there. And so we can test for conscientiousness, and we can test assessments for IQ. And then what we do is we interview around integrity, curiosity, and communication skills, both written, but probably more important today are written skills than spoken skills, in my opinion, because the majority of our communication is no longer on the telephone. When your telephone rings, you get annoyed. When you get a text, you get excited. It's like a little prize. And so if you take that and extrapolate that out, those are the big important parts. Yet I don't know many interview processes these days in employers that explore those with deliberation.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about you as a leader, because you have built this organization. Just in your relationships with your clients, you're leading the way and creating new kinds of thinking. And this is a podcast about leadership. And so I'm curious, this might seem like kind of an off the wall question, but are there triggers that kind of get you off course from time to time? And because a lot of people suffer from that, let's face it, and they don't, sometimes they're not even aware. You strike me as somebody who's very self-aware. What are those triggers or those tendencies that might get you off course, and how might you avoid them?
So caveat when I answer this question, I am still a massive work in progress.
We all are.
Yeah, a massive work. In fact, probably most of my LinkedIn work is just living myself out loud online. What I'm shuttling through, what I'm watching, what I'm listening to, what I'm experiencing almost as a psychologist's couch, because I'm speaking with some of the most brilliant executives in the world on both the good things and the less than optimal things that happen to them. So, but I would guess the thing that triggers me is if I ever interpret, and most likely misinterpret, selfish behavior within my organization. Our team understands there's a triad that we serve. It's logo, team, self, in that order. And the logo is sort of the logos of the organization. What is the North Star? And why that's important. And let me just say this, biologically and socially, we're taught to be selfish. Most organizations you come out of, it's all about taking care of yourself first, because it's a man eat man world, woman eat woman world. It's that world. And so you're taught from a very young age that look out for yourself first. And so what we try and do is make sure we identify people who have the opportunity to grow beyond that. But logo first is, if you're stuck with a question and you're by yourself and you're considering something, the reflexive is, how does this serve me? You've got to quickly short circuit that and say, how does this serve the North Star that is very clear? If you sat any of our teammates down, they would know where they're going. So let me serve that logo first. And then let me bring that back down to my community, right? And again, the world should live like this, is what does our nation stand for, right? Political agendas aside. Then what does my town stand for? Then what does my household stand for? And so if you go logo team, so I have logo the Mullings Group companies, and when somebody's on the horns of a dilemma, what would I do North Star for good of the company? And then let's say it's DragonFly, and in this organization, in this studio, there's a question they have is, well, how do I serve DragonFly with this decision? And then I come down to the self. And if you live in the right community and the right leadership makes sure that that is very clear and that will be rewarded, then the self gets served all the time. And so, my answer is, if I see selfish behavior, and then I have had to learn over the years, stop, pause. Is that selfish behavior from a carbon-based behavior, or is it something that you can go ahead and explore, identify with the person who demonstrated it and say, this is how I interpreted this, did I get this wrong? And then, so that's where I've been working on, because I am too quick to assess things. I'm really good at patterns. And sometimes your strength is your weakness, and I might misinterpret a selfish behavior on somebody until I get all the information, and then I was incorrect. And so but the trigger to me is selfish behavior, because that then talks to integrity. And those are two non-negotiables in our world.
I get that. Well, I think COVID, there's been a whole lot talked about empathy, right? Feeling what other people are feeling. And so hopefully you and other leaders have been able to strengthen that muscle, if you will, that empathy, or open your heart, dare I say, to appreciate what somebody else is going through. Do you think on that point, when you were talking about that selfish orientation, and that is the human condition to a large extent. I'm going to get a little philosophical with you though for a minute, because I think some of that is based on fear, isn't it? When you think about, it was survival of the fittest. When cavemen were out there, that's that's what they had to do. Have we not evolved? Because at some point, I fear that, to use the word differently, I'm concerned that we might not actually be optimizing for the collective if we're still oriented first for self.
Look, first of all, looking at fear, and you're spot on there. So we always want to look at ourselves first, and it's okay to do that. And let me explain that. And fear, there's a great acronym that my dear friend Tony Blauer shared with me. It's false expectations appearing real. So fear, typically, you only have fear in the future. You never have fear in the present state, and you never have fear in the past state. Now, you might have a memory that will evoke fear, but that past memory is now playing itself out in the future, and it hasn't occurred yet. So that fear is something that you've got to get your arms around, because it will ruin the best of a person. Yeah. We are biologically wired to serve ourselves first. Now, having said that, you also have this ability to intercept that. And so let's look at this. Is if I serve myself first, I'm likely to live a relatively short life back in caveman times. Why? Because the odds of me go out and kill a woolly mammoth and then eat that entire woolly mammoth myself is not possible. And there was no refrigeration back then, and there was no, right? So, but if I killed that woolly mammoth and shared it with the people around me, I first thought of myself, but as a great leader, I'm going to say, let me share the spoils with my team. And now what I'm doing is I'm borrowing future consideration from them of when they kill a woolly mammoth and they didn't have any food. Or maybe I run for 30 days and there's no woolly mammoth to be found. But the tribe down the road from me killed a woolly mammoth, and they did not forget that I fed them in my time of robustness. And so I can think of myself first, but then I have to go, okay, how can I think of others? Pick the right tribe, though, because you can get played. I've had my people surrounded by me. If I spin around here, I can show you the arrows and knife marks in my back. But if you pick the right tribe and you short circuit the thought of self, and again, it goes back to logos, team, self, but I take care of others in my time of need or my time of building, I will be served. Yeah. And so that fear is normal, but always keep in mind that you're worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, and you might disarm yourself of coming with your best self because you'll be pulling your punches.
Yeah, I so agree with that. That's a great point. And I love that acronym as well. Say it again.
False expectations appearing real.
False expectations appearing real. Drop it, right?
That's it.
Get rid of the fear.
That's it. That's good. And it's a good, it shouldn't hold you hostage, but it should have your intuition and your spidey senses go up.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, there's room for all that. On a related note, do you have any particular faith or mindset, philosophy that you practice or follow?
Well, I think I think what I like to do, and this is my guidance to most people, especially when they're starting out in life, and especially to the younger crowd, and it could be the older crowd as well. I'm 60, so I'm allowed to say older crowd. Take on as much as you can at a young age or any age and see what you can do. So just take that down and find out what your real limits are. And it's still a practice I subscribe to today is how much can I take on? And about when I'm ready to think I die, I think Goggins said it is you still got at least another 30% left in your tank before you die. So I would say take on as much as you possibly can, and then constantly the next day try and outwork that. And I don't mean that in the work environment exclusively. I mean that in your relationships. I mean that in how you raise your children. Take on as much empathy. Take on as much aggressiveness. Take on as much of a workload, because we're only here for a really short time when you think about it in a blink. And why would you have any sense of regret in that rocking chair on that very last day that you knew you were capable of so much more? So that would be one. And then be a lifelong learner. Autodidactic, devour everything you can. Everything you can swallow up, because you're a lot more of what you don't know than are what you do know. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much more for you to discover. And, you know, I've taken on insane new hobbies at 58. And because it's a learning opportunity and experiential opportunity. So I would say that. And then I'm learning at this. I'm not quite good at this yet. I continue to try and be a disciple of tactically deferring gratification.
Tactically.
Explain.
Okay.
Well, there's some people that will practice self-abuse for self-gratification. Like, no, I'm going to be stronger than that. I'm not going to like that. Well, explain to me why you won't have that glass of wine today. And tactically, if that will ring out to what your long-term goals are,
yeah,
why are you going to practice, you know, deferment of gratification today as a avatar instead of having a functional reason for doing it? Mm. So I'm still working on that.
Could it be a lack of self-control in that example? That's what comes to mind.
Yeah, of course it could. And that's why you probably know that Marshmallow Test that they had in the 50s, that longitudinally with the kids. Is so the mom came into the room and they videotaped this and they put two mushrooms. I'm thinking of microdosing, sorry.
Right.
Two marshmallows down on the table and said, if you don't eat those, when I come back, and I don't say when I'm going to come back, I will give you two more. And so the parent went out and, you know, I think they did it to 100 kids, 200 kids. And when parents came back, a reasonable percentage of the kids couldn't help themselves and ate either one or both of those or took a nibble out of one. But nonetheless, they didn't get any more. And the ones that didn't touch it and waited, when they took those 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years down range, the children who were able to defer that gratification tactically had much more success based upon careers and economic earnings than the children who impulsively jammed those two marshmallows in their mouth the second mom walked out the door. Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said about that.
Got it. Okay, wait. You mentioned microdosing. I'm not going to be so bold as to ask you if you have. I wouldn't be that intrusive, but I happen to have seen an article today that talked about microdosing being akin to among parents. It's kind of like the moms having wine during the play. Did you happen to see that?
No, but Mother's Little Helper and Valiums in the back in the day, wines, right?
Yeah.
Is you know, now we're getting edibles on THC, and right. So if you slide that over to shrooms or some other things, look, I think I'm waiting to see clinical papers on it. I understand there are some white papers out there, so I've got to dig into it.
Michael Pollan is right. He's got a whole center out at Berkeley.
Right.
Yeah.
So look, I think everything's appropriate in the right dose or in the right environment, or what are you treating? I'm not one to have a judgment on any of that stuff. Now, I think it's age appropriate.
For sure.
For
It's not
sure,
recreational.
right? Like, God, I'll talk about this because he's near and dear to my heart. So I'm coming back from J.P. Morgan a couple of years ago, and I'm in our plane, and I get a text from my wife, and she says, "I have to talk to you when we get home." I'm like, "Yeah, what's up? Don't play that game. Tell me now." So she sends me a couple pictures, and there's a pipe, and there's a bag of weed, and all this other stuff. I'm like, "Okay." And she's like, "I found this in your son's room today." My son at that time, I think, was 16. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to judge that. I'm going to be like, okay, let's go dig into it and figure out what's going on here. And of course, in his sense of major intelligence, and he's a very smart boy, he says, "It makes me smarter."
Okay.
Right. And I've said, okay, so I've got a lot of friends. I said at 35 or 40, I can see it recreationally. At 25 to 30, I can see it. But at 16, 17, 18, I don't think the flower is your friend as you're trying to drive yourself towards getting into the best university and adopting an insane work habit. You're not an artist. You're not writing music. You're not creating incredible paintings to go into this spot. And I've never learned, I still to this day interview a lot of my successful friends who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I said, did hitting the flower increase your likelihood of success or decrease? And nobody's yet said increase when it came to the workplace. Again, age appropriate.
Yep.
Age appropriate with everything. Right? The tattoos you get at 20 and the person you marry at 20 is probably not the tattoo or the person you would have married at 40 if you made the same decision.
Probably not.
So
That's right.
microdosing at the right time, in the right situation, I'm all for.
Thank you for sharing that. I took us in a completely different direction, but
my son's going to be pissed at me, but I'm just throwing around the truth.
You didn't say his name outright. Do you have more than one son?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Let's go back to the talent market.
Okay.
Because what I sense about what you do is, and it's clear that you have an orientation of the people versus just and you said it's not talent acquisition. These are people, and you don't like to use the word candidate.
No, I don't.
So instead, what word do you use, and how do you think that shapes and maybe redefines the perception that some of these prospective employers might have of these individuals?
Mm-hmm. So I use the word individual because that's what they are, individuals. So we don't like the word candidate. Candidate infers a thing. And when you start to refer to people as things, you start down a slippery slope. And I can take that way out through, governments and atrocities over the decades. So if you start referring to individuals as candidates, that's starting to sort of objectify them. And to me, when I can find out why a person wants to go somewhere, what they want to do, who they want to become, I can better prescribe for them where they may want to look. And then I can take that to my client companies and explain how you may want to look at this individual today. Because granted, you can't just hire somebody on who they potentially could be, but what you want to learn is what are their skills today? How does that answer my need today, my exact need today, the problem I'm trying to solve? And when you find out who somebody wants to become, and you can facilitate that in your organization, whether it's on a 3, 5, or 10-year sort of period, it drives your retention. And when you can go ahead and increase your level of retention, you then help your company, because one of the worst things to do is have a 10-person team that is a bunch of Navy SEALs, and you lose one of them. That cohesiveness can put you into disarray for a while, and then you lose your speed, and then you've got to slow down. So if you can learn who a person wants to become, why they want to become it, present to them in your company why you might be a good fit for them, you drive retention, and then you serve yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It seems related to me, but I heard you say great people are never looking for a job.
Mm-hmm.
Say more about that. I'm inclined to agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, great people, assuming they're in a functional or semi-functional organization, are usually not let go. Although that changes, that does occur time to time when you hit a financial situation. But assuming that an organization's in reasonable health, and the good people are good team players and are uber competent at what they do, they're not looking for a job. And when they do want to look for a job, they generally have, between their reference network, between people they've worked with before, between competitive companies, it's not even like they're looking for a job. They are looking for where their next career move is. So that's part of that answer. The other part is they're so darn busy solving big problems, their head is down, and they're not looking at want ads. So for all of the companies that are putting their job postings online, I'm not suggesting that you're getting the people who are the B and C players, but I am telling you, you're not getting the A players. And in the A player world, I've yet to find an A player who sent her resume into HR for a job posting. Typically, she's going around and talking to the head of that department or the C-suite, or they're networked. So if your primary game plan and strategy for finding people is putting out snappy job postings, the A players are not answering those.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. And back to, I think, one of your earlier points, which is, it's a 1950s construct that a lot of these companies are employing. This whole, you mentioned the want ads. I mean, I'm not sure that the young people actually know what those are, but now it's on LinkedIn. It's just automated. It's the same thing. It's just this list after list after list, and I don't care what the algorithm is. It's just, it's pretty funky. Speaking of algorithm, I'm going to again go with the flow for a second, because I'd love to get your reaction to this. I think about it in a couple different contexts. One is around diversity, equity, inclusion, which has been an area of expertise that I have in executive recruiting. It was a Harvard Business School professor did a report recently where he talks about hidden talent, and he's suggesting that like 17% of the workforce, 27 million people, get bumped out of consideration. The algorithm just bumps them out because they are veterans or 6 month or more gap, or what would it be? Any number of conditions, a trailing spouse, previously incarcerated, people with some mental health challenges. These are viable people. They're not damaged goods per se, but they're not getting any consideration. Does that resonate? Does that sound possible in your mind? And if so, what do you think might be? Because when we're in, I guess this is kind of a lead into the war for talent. And we're saying that, everybody's like, oh, they're running around, the sky is falling and there's shortages everywhere. And of course there are in some areas, but there are a whole bunch of other people that might not look like you or have the same whatever. I would think that should be worthy of consideration. Am I crazy?
No, so you've got to, God, that's a complicated subject, and I love it because of that. So look, we are all discriminatory. We are. Right? Testing is discriminatory.
Biased. Yep.
Algorithms are written with an unconscious bias.
Yep.
IQ tests are discriminatory. Assessments are discriminatory. Now, too many people align discrimination with intention versus discrimination. So discrimination with intention based upon race, creed, color, gender, disability, single mom, all of that. So I think when we think about inclusivity, I'm okay on inclusivity and diversity in a conversation. I'll tell you where I start to have a problem with the third term that's thrown in there is equity. And let me make sure I extrapolate that out in a conversation. I am a total believer in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. Because when you start to go down the pathway of equality of outcomes, you then step away from a hierarchy of competency. Because this country, capitalism, and capitalism is not a bad thing. It's not at the root of any evil. It is in the pack sometimes, and it's an easy finger point to shake your finger at. But the hierarchy of competency can use some work on diversity and inclusivity.
Yep.
As long as it's not at the expense. I'll tell you where I have a problem is, and again, and it's easy one to point to and said, there's 7 white men in their 60s on that board. Get one of them out and let's put in somebody who doesn't look like them. If that in itself is your criteria, I have a problem.
I do too.
Okay. And so that's where when I think about inclusivity and diversity, as long as it still has the icon of hierarchy of competency in there. Now, the competency, I might not be the best mathematician out of those 7 60-year-old white men, but I might be good enough in a competency level to be in there, and I may bring another perspective of the category that is not included in that group of people that is much needed in a monolithic structure that we have today. So I am all for equality of outcomes, inclusivity, and diversity. But here's where it gets complicated. Where do you stop at the intersection of inclusivity? So what if it's black, female, male, gender, and however many categories there are on that and people identify with today? How about disability? How about single mom? How about single black mom? How about single white mom? How come we don't talk about single parent homes where 70% of that population amounts for juvenile delinquency, child murderers, and incarceration? I don't see anybody with their hands up in the air. And if you really wanted to longitudinally impact society by including or not including people, how about single family homes? Where if you gave that mom or dad a better opportunity because they were single mom, maybe their children who will impact society even more downrange would make for a better place to live. So where I start to run into issue is inclusivity of who by design is exclusivity of everybody else if you're starting to talk about groups of people instead of sort of the sovereign individual.
Talk more about this hierarchy of competency, because as I've spent 30 plus years, I'm in your age range, in the corporate world, one of the things that became clear to me early in my executive recruiting career was that resumes can look amazing, right? People have had some tremendous experiences. And yet I've met people and, captains of industry that when you start actually talking to them and working alongside of them, they've got some big competency gaps, right? I'm not saying I'm perfect, but as a Black woman, there have been times that I know I was not given an opportunity in favor of a white male because people were more comfortable with him. So I'm kind of mixing things here, but my question is more around how are we defining competency and who's deciding? Because I would venture to say, by my estimation, we've got a lot of leaders in corporate America these days who are not competent as leaders. They might be brilliant subject matter experts, but they are not leading effectively.
And again, I love you for bringing up this subject because it covers so many different paths that are at risk today. So in any hierarchy, even of competency, you're going to have bad behavior. Every single hierarchy has it. I don't care if it's of competency. I don't care if it's of any skill. You will have a percentage of that populace who will have bad intentions and have a nepotistic approach to things. So let's first of all say that. But that does not make all hierarchies bad. So starting there. The world has gone through, and until now, the hierarchies have been driven by, and let's just use the business world as the area we're going to explore. The hierarchy of competency, you have to look at what is the test and who is doing the evaluating of competency.
That's right.
And so if the judges were to bring in people who looked, acted like them in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and dare I say the 90s, without any accountability, well, that's what got ushered in there. Not across the board, but as I said, most of the hierarchies of competency are pretty good. Now, here's what's changed, especially in the last 10 years. And you brought this up very cleverly. The world right now is still made up of a whole bunch of people who are domain subject matter experts. They go deep, but they don't go broad. And I'm gonna guess some of your experience, I'm guessing because I was not there, was you sat in a meeting with a domain subject matter expert, and that person may have had a brilliance in that area that you took him or her out and put them in to solve a problem. But the second you tried to turn that person from an I into a T and be broad amongst many domains, they got stuck in their trench and couldn't see outside of it. And you pushed in your head back from the table and go, are you kidding me? And so I think the world of work and all the organizations that are being built today are going to start realizing that the I's are valuable and they should be brought to the table at the right time, but the T's are going to be the ones who are going to have an inclusivity mindset of not just gender and color and sex, but of what is the tool that we need right now. Everybody's just as important, but the problem we're trying to solve, let's bring in people who are great artists to solve a math problem. Let's bring, because how they think is different than the mathematician. I forget what it was. When you look at scientists across the board, it's really interesting, and I'm gonna get this somewhat right. When you look at scientists across the board, the percentage of Nobel Peace Prize winners, 80% of them had a very deep hobby in the arts, in music, dance, paint. Yet when you're talking about science, you don't think about that.
That's right.
And so this domain expertise has been shortchanging the proper development of business moving forward in the last decade. And I do believe we're going to start to see more T people sitting at the top who know how to access that expertise. And that expertise could be, what does my community want? Now, that's another challenge, is how does one person speak on behalf of a community? How can you as a black woman speak for blacks? Well, does that mean you can speak for all blacks? Can you speak for just your
I'm not
category?
trying to.
Yeah, and I know you're not, but this is where the silly populace comes in and said, well, let's get a gay person. Let's get a black person. Let's get an Asian person, because they're going to represent that sector. And this is where these sweeping sort of demands are starting to come in with boards like in California and with other areas. I don't think it's doing the people you're trying to be inclusive of any favors.
Yeah. I wonder, going back to this whole idea of the competency piece, I have felt strongly, and I'm seeing it now, that I do believe that competencies, if you're assessing for them, it can level the playing field and you can get greater diversity than what we've seen in the past. Simplistic, but I believe it.
As long as
If
it
you,
starts with equality of opportunity. So where we start is, so let's look at that. Because I want to explore this with you. I'm curious about your thoughts. Is competency only can get revealed if you're at the table?
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay, tell me why.
Because I think about my own experience, and I studied linguistics and French in college because I decided not to be a veterinarian right after I got there. And then I went to business school. I was a recruiter for a couple of years out of undergrad, went to business school, went into commercial real estate, didn't like it. I never applied for a job afterwards. I was able instinctively to, and I refer to competencies as the deconstructed elements of how someone does something.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to articulate my experiences and what I had learned from them and sort of deconstruct the most relevant parts of what I had done, building relationships, being analytical. These are things that transcended the function and the role in the industry, such that I was able to move into one of the big search firms and write a book and do all these other things and work for Google. So to me, and my dad, by the way, was a prison warden. So I saw inmates when I was growing up who clearly I could tell, maybe it was, I don't know, I could tell many of them were really, really smart, some of these folks. And they were young men, they were the juvenile folks. So I say all that to say that if we could begin to strip away and take the behaviors out of the context of the job, sometimes the role, and I don't think that's a stretch. I think we have been hiring, we've just gotten so rote about it, right? We've just been hiring people. Ooh, we didn't talk about this, relationships. Oh, you know so and so? Oh, come on over here. Come on in and let's talk,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've gotten, to me, far, far away from the elements of what are going to make someone successful, the behaviors that are required.
Okay, so I'm tracking you now on competency. When I'm thinking about competency, I'm starting to think about what are the very specific skills. So if I lined up 5 people at the table here and 2 of them were butchers and 3 weren't butchers, the butchers would have a higher level of competence if I throw aside a beef on the table, right?
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that butcher then, if the same people showed up and running a butcher store, or the large part of the meat market at a Publix, which is a big supermarket chain down here in the U.S., and whether it's Kroger's, right? The competency depends on what is the grand goal of that of which we're trying to take on. So there's skill set competency, like same tool, different person. Like let's use LeBron. Competency in playing hoops, absolutely.
Yep.
Now, does that get him a seat at the table in business opportunities as well? Is he a great businessman? I don't know.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but he's got one of the things that's required, or 2 of the things, brand name as well as some cash, right? So
And arguably discipline, right? There's some other behaviors that he's exhibited that could be relevant.
Correct. Like look at Magic. So we can use, let's use Magic Johnson. He's even a better example. Great hoops play. Tactically, technically, strategically, intellectually. Then went on, like Shaq, to make more money post his career. But he had the discipline to study business and select the right partners and select the right investments. That wasn't by mistake, or
That's right.
Right. So when we talk about competency, I'm glad we flushed this out further, is a hierarchy of competency in that of which you're trying to get done requires you to have a T. Now, you need people who are I's, domain experts, on your team in order for you to fulfill that. So my lead person, maybe who leads editing here, has a higher level of competency in me on that specific task. On designing and envisioning the business, I might have a higher level of competency there. But we can't live without each other.
Yep. Agreed. My concern, and I want you to tell me this, is that leaders today, I fear, still don't necessarily have, and you describe it as the T, right? That's part of they're looking across.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are specific competency areas, leadership competencies, like building inclusive teams. It's getting the best. And you could arguably take a leader, it used to be in vogue to take former military officers, less so now, it seems, and bring them into corporate roles because they had some of those leadership competencies. They knew how to inspire, they knew how to align. And so I'm not sure we're getting that. They knew how to give feedback, right? I'm fearing, and I just saw, not to throw another wrench into this, but I just saw something that said, given the low unemployment rate that we have, what did they call it? Job security is going to be at an all-time high. People don't have to worry about losing their jobs, and that scares the crap out of me, to be honest with you, because we don't need people who are hiding and just kind of getting by in their work at the same time that we're having leaders who I fear aren't necessarily leading and managing in ways that are activating and optimizing what needs to happen in our economies. I'd
Mm.
hate to be pontificating here and
Mm.
confusing and conflating all these things, but I want us to really focus on the leadership behaviors that are required now more than ever. We've got leaders running around going, "Oh no, hybrid work. What do I do?" And they're looking for a playbook.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back on the leadership for a second. Here's where my concern is I think the intention of inclusivity and diversity should be front and center in
Mhm.
everything we do, not just the workplace, but everything we do. Here's where it starts to become a problem. The ideologues to the left who will use that as a battleground
Mhm.
have scared the bejesus out of some leaders, not all leaders,
Mhm.
that I need to understand and I need to be able to argue the point of why does it have to be black, male, female, gender, disability, single mom. I want to be able to have a clear, fair dialogue around that
Mhm.
before you start holding up a sign and telling me I'm a bigot or racist. I
Mhm.
I want to understand because I
Mhm.
want the best workforce possible. And if
Right.
you give me a chance to understand why that will bring me the best workforce possible, but public boards won't allow that conversation to happen openly.
Mhm.
Certain ideologues are forcing this down as an agenda and not really caring about the underrepresented groups are out there. They're using it as a battering ram. And
Mhm.
so I think we're always going to have that problem because I do believe people want to be inclusive in general. It's now maybe not inclusive by categories that they don't understand
Mhm.
or they historically have misunderstood. And it's
Mhm.
very difficult for some of these leaders, and it's very difficult for the people who have the intention of getting there. And again, I don't know why they are representing a group. That's a whole nother conversation there. But has become a hot potato. And so leaders have stepped away from the table from like, you can't sit with a female in your office with the door closed
I know.
if there's a 20-year difference between you and her.
Yeah.
Yet if it was a male, it wouldn't matter. And so these
We're
executive,
really making this way too hard now,
way
right?
too
And
hard.
we're back to fear.
That's right.
Fear.
And so I think some of these leaders are just ignorant. And I
Some
also
are.
think some of these, but I'm in my heart, I believe a majority of these leaders would like to get to the bottom of the dialogue without being, when they really start to push and point, whether it's through ignorance, bad experience, lack of
Mhm.
communication, or understanding a point, they're immediately tossed into you're a racist or you're a bigot because you're
Yeah.
questioning why.
Yeah. There are, you know, racists and bigots of all colors, shapes, and sizes. It's not, it's not unique to white men. or
Correct.
white women.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And the
Yeah.
people who stand up and claim they represent an entire group are just as guilty as the people who are ignorant by still committing the atrocities on the workforce.
Sure. Sure. So do you have, as a recruiter, I'm sure your clients are probably, I hear about it all the time, and I'm not actively executing searches these days. They want to see greater diversity in the slates and or at least the pipelines that you're presenting. And how are you addressing that?
And there's a good percentage of my clients who genuinely mean that.
Yeah.
And then there's a percentage of my clients that are doing that to check a box.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to both of those parties are the following. I'm going to bring you the best talent possible. I'm also going to go out of my way to represent, and I will dig deeper and harder to represent a diverse and inclusive slate to you. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I want you to know this. If we think about the STEM field and we think about sort of the closed community for all of time that medical device has, medical device will, until recently, would not hire outside of medical device. So if I look at the STEM population that goes to college, university, and graduates, and then was in the medical device industry, and they were engineers or quality engineers or regulatory engineers or in clinical, the number of people that fall on where the government defines diversity as is minimal. So you're talking about a zero-sum game, because it's not like 10,000 new individuals come into the industry every year as it pulls up to the bus that drops off, or the train or the plane that drops off everybody. It's just a finite number of people that's impossible to meet. And so that has to start at the kitchen table when they're 6 years old in the underrepresented population.
I hear you. I get it.
Yep.
And in healthcare and other areas where you need that very specific expertise. But I got to believe there are some roles, some functions where you don't need to have had, where there are indeed transferable competencies and skills that could be leveraged. So you don't have to come from the industry to be in the industry.
Yeah. So your question to me, because there's two answers, your question to me was, what do I tell my clients?
It was.
Right.
Yeah.
And so and people usually come to me, well, always come to me with the most difficult searches that they couldn't fill themselves. So they're coming to me asking me to throw a dart bullseye every single time. And as they layer on top of that, we also want diversity and inclusivity. I say, yes, absolutely. Please know that the number of people that meet this spec in the first place are 500 across the country. And the odds that they fall within that, and they're looking for a job, that they will fall within that category as you define.
Or not looking, if you can,
well, that's my point. They're not even looking. So I can't even present, I could only present you the people that are recruitable and looking.
Play.
Right. Yeah. So, but what here's the good news. The medtech, health tech industry now is starting to bring in more people that don't need med tech or health tech experience because of software, because of firmware, because of AI, because of machine learning, because of other skills that are at the higher level outside of our healthcare industry. Now we need them in our healthcare industry because we're not just making things anymore, we're actually dealing with digital precision. Now I start to open up that slate more than ever. So we have it there. But again, I answered that question, like when my clients come to me, they're already looking for a unicorn to start with.
Yep. And possibly for the wrong reasons, to the extent that
absolutely
that individual, if they get in, if they are hired, there's this good chance that you're going to have what I refer to as organ rejection. The culture isn't ready for them. There's not a commitment.
That's right.
They're seen as different. They're labeled.
Seen as different. There's not a commitment. There's a variety of unfortunate sort of triggers that occur through that, and even thinking differently. And so yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Indeed. Well, Joe, I have so enjoyed this. I have one last question for you, and I ask this of every single one of my guests.
Sure.
And that is, as we're signing off, are there any words of wisdom or hope or encouragement you would like to share with our audience, especially all that's going on in the world right now?
Well, be curious about everything. People ask me, why are you doing that? It doesn't make sense for what you do. I'm like, because I want to see what happens. Right? So I think living your life with, I don't know, but let's see what happens. Right? So that's one, that curiosity. Be a lifelong learner, like really commit to that. And I think if in business, my tagline is build, teach, and inspire. I like to build things. I love to be a teacher. And I love to inspire dialogue, thought, provocative conversation. And so I think if you do that and you're constantly giving, you can then serve yourself by be standing in plain sight when somebody needs something. And that's been our philosophy as an organization is I will give, 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 give. And it's not selfless. In business, it has an agenda. I'm going to give you more than you ever expected from us for free. However, when you need something, you're going to remember me first. And then you're going to come to me and ask me to help you solve your problem. So I think those are the things I would leave to the business people as well as those maybe that are not even in business.
Most of us are in business in some form or another, right?
There you go. So
Yeah.
I think that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you for that. So appreciated this conversation. Really provocative, really interesting. I wish you much continued success in all of your endeavors.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can connect again. I would really welcome that.
I really enjoyed this. It was fun and it was thoughtful and provocative, just the way I like to roll.
Excellent. Joe Mullings, keep up the good work. We'll be in touch soon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. And that is Fifth Dimensional Leadership. See you next time.